Welcome to What It Is This Week. This week I'm going to show you a couple of projects that I created in Quill. And the first one is this. I created in internally in Quill, at least all the graphics, all what you see here with colors and lines. And then I decided to export it into Blender to use the Eevee render engine, which is the new real-time rendering engine from the Blender Foundation and its software. And it's been quite good to use this pipeline that I am working right now. Quite fun to just paint whatever you want inside Quill, and then you export that as an FBX if you don't have animation. But if you have an animation, you could use the Alembic format, which is a .abc extension. So in case if you're watching this and wanted to try to use Quill and don't know how to apply the colors, because when you import the file, it usually looks like this. It's only the mesh, and you don't know what to do. If you're using, well, it doesn't matter, any version of Blender, the current stable 1 2.79 or the beta version 2.80, you can at least in the 2.80 go to the shading tab, or I guess it has a different name in the 2.79. You have to go to the texture node editor. I think it has a different name in the 2.79. But once you're here, I usually import my Quill elements in a different collection, so it doesn't interfere with the other elements. You select the elements that you want to obtain the color, and this node looks like a mess, but I was trying other stuff, so I usually leave all that thing there. But the important thing is these three nodes. I'm going to disconnect this one. But important here is that your mesh, if you go to the right panel and go here to the object data, which is vertex icon, there is a vertex colors subsection here, and that means that you can pull the color data that is from Quill to Blender. And I guess I don't know who I saw did this, or if I recall that from other projects, but it's knowledge that it's already out there. So you can rename this if you want, just the value you need, but you need to assign that color, because that is not an automatic process, an automated process in the Quill export into Blender, or I guess any other software. I don't know if it creates the nodes. Usually, sometimes I think it's the from Oculus Medium, where you can export an FBX format with the colors, and they create a node setup. I don't know if that's on the Blender side or Medium side that they create this structure that is easy for Blender to read. But in the case of Quill, that doesn't exist, so you have to do it manually. And usually, well, you have to change here to the material view in Blender. So I'm going to unplug this just to show how it looks by default. you need to create a new material or use the default when you select your object. And you need to add this node, which is called attribute. You press Shift A, and you go hit your input and attribute, and you can move this node here, which has the color output. And since it's an attribute, what it means is it's going to pull that value for somewhere. So I guess behind the scenes, the way Blender works is that it's going to look for that attribute property or whatever name they use behind the scenes. So you need to write that name, which is here on the vertex colors, inside your attribute value, and that will pull that data into your Blender configuration and node setup. And what I've seen many people do is just to pull this and add it into the material output, and it works. For other reasons, sometimes well, I've noticed different behavior, but I usually use the emission node prior to paste it into the material output, because it looks flat. I guess the same effect, but the way the output is I mean, the nodes is a color to a color and a shader to a shader. So for me, this is the way. But you can use it directly to and I also use sometimes the emission to create different effects. So you could increase the emission value to something like this. And here in the what is this tab called, the render tab, you can add this check to the bloom, and it will add this nice effect. But in case you need it, if not, one default value, it's quite good. And that's for the material. For the rest, I usually like to create a very small animation with the camera. Some people obviously do not recommend to do this, what I'm going to show you, which is like they call editing with the camera while they're filming, but it's what I do because it's super easy, at least for me. I just do a keyframe at the point I need and jump to the next location, and I continue with the animation, and again jump and move to the next location. And in the case of Eevee, it's quite easy to render a frame. It's like 4 seconds or sometimes less, sometimes more, but compared with a 2-minute rendering cycles, 4 seconds, it's a bliss. So sometimes when I'm working with these Eevee renders, and I know it's going to be a short animation, I change the frame rate to 60, and the result is incredible. It's very fluid, smooth, and I love it. It reminds me of the old games, 60 frames per second, or the CRT monitors and television. We have this very smooth looking image. So that's why I like it, and you will notice a difference if you try to render an animation at 60 frames per second. And also, I think I'm not sure. Maybe I'm talking without looking, but I think Quill does not have 60 frames per second, and the camera movement, it's something that you have to do by yourself. and that's why I decided to do this on Blender, to have my own control with the camera. And I know it's really smooth, and it's something that I always like to do in Blender. And also here, for the animation, I wanted a small sound effect, so I added a couple of speakers with crickets, and you can modify here the volume because it was quite loud, and this one low, and this one I increased full, and I actually had to modify its value outside from Blender because I needed a higher volume. And the cool thing about this is that if you render the audio, it does it taking into account where the camera is. So if I am here, if the camera is here, the sound is obviously higher, or higher pitch or volume, closer to this point, and you can barely hear the sound of this one on the left. But once you jump over here, you hear this quite loud, and this one quite distance. There is also a thing that you might have to take into account with these Blender animations and the sound, is that there is a Doppler effect. If you find it on Wikipedia, you have a better explanation on that. But it's that sound when a car or you're on a highway and a car passes at high speed, and you hear the volume fading away as the vehicle pass on the distance. You hear that attenuation, that the fading, and if it's getting closer, it's the pitch increases. So that's exactly what happened with that Doppler effect. So you have to be aware of that. And I'm mentioning that because I had since I do these jumps obviously it's an instant teleportation, and that makes sometimes if you put attention in the original animation, you hear like a click, and it's because of the Doppler effect, because it compresses the whole audio, and you notice it's like a click, and it's weird. Sometimes the video starts like that or ends like that, and in each of these jumps, you will hear a click. And I don't mind that much, but I had to edit a bit the audio with software outside the Blender to remove a bit that click, because it was a lot higher than you can hear in that audio. And the audio is rendered outside from your animation. I usually render frame by frame, because if an error happens, and it will happen to you, Blender crashes or something like that, or you press escape and the animation stops, it means that there is no audio. You can render an MP4 file, but it's not ideal. Because of that, you better have a frame render. So here on this button, render button, there is a render audio. It will export your audio as a file, and you can use that file later. I don't know if Premiere, or sometimes I like to use very quickly Virtual Dub, because it's super quick to just mix images and audio, and you can mix them both, and both content are apart from each other, so you have to take that into account. And I think that's pretty much from this file animation. And I guess, well, I can try to run here the animation pretty quick. You can test your animations in Quill um, as they run in Blender in real time, and uh, very smooth. As you can see, 60 frames per second is what you would expect from a high performance software. And yeah, I don't know if you can hear the click. Let me check. That click, that's what happens. Oh, I think I don't have activated the desktop audio, but oh no, yeah, it is. But yeah, that's as the thing with um, with the Doppler effect in the audio in Blender. So let's go to the next uh, animation or project that I made with Quill. So this is the author Quill project. I internally call this project Windows Ship or Windows Ship because the ship itself has this round windows, or I don't know how do you call that, um, uh, domes kind of thing. You can see. Uh, so that was my inside code, but then I changed the name to Red Ship because it's a more likable name. And yeah, so let's talk about this little thing. Well, originally it's just the ship. I have separate Quill file just for the ship, and there is a turbine or engine behind with animation, and you can see there the gas coming out, also on turbines below, and that was just this animation. And I know it's I think it's kind of hard to manage some stuff in Quill because you wanna. I feel like I'm not exactly. I feel a bit trapped when I work with Quill. Maybe because my knowledge with Blender, when I have that flexibility. So what I did this time is to separate in modules in the most software engineering way to see things. I separated in modules my problems. So I kept the main ship on a file with the fire engines running, and I was actually not thinking to stopping the engines. As you can see here, the engines continue even here when it's supposed to be stopped, and but you can see it because of the camera angle, so it doesn't matter. At least not on this animation. Probably I'll use that later. I don't know. Recycle, yay! So the ship is one thing. This smoke animations is just one. I just made one and duplicated that into Blender, and they appear at the exact moment when I need them. They are not in frame when they appear, so it's kind of unnecessary. But let's say there is practice for any other project when I need to do that, so they pop when I need it. So there is that duplicated. I don't know if I change it the cycle to make it look different. I don't know if I did it. It will have been cool. If I had a close up, that maybe that would be necessary, but I don't remember that right now. And the other thing I did is this two smoke tails. there is a thing with Quill that colors are not uh, like properly imported into Blender. Well, they are properly imported, but there is one very important aspect of this Quill color that it's not been imported, or Blender, let's say, it's not importing them correctly, and that is transparency. So it's not working. Uh, let's change to the shading a bit to show that. I was trying. It's not that one. It's this one. To there should be like a transparency value here, but these colors are just RGB. They're not RGBA. And if you go to the object data tag, you see that the property is called obviously RGBA because it could have uh, transparency or alpha values as the A shows here, and the truth is it's not. So I lost a bit of that data from Quill, which make the plume look beautiful, and that was kind of a loss here. So it's smoke effects with Quill and transparency really cool, but a bit of loss here. So I had to settle with flat white color, but it's okay. Let's say it's okay. So it's just a very short amount of frames. Animation continues, and when it starts to rotate backwards to land, I create and scale down animation. That's from Blender. You can scale the object here with keyframing. There is a root, which is an empty. In Blender they call it empty. It's just here it is. There's the empty. Just a crosshair. So that indicates that that's the parent of all the other objects from that imported object. So if I move that, as you can see, you can change the animation. If you select that, there are other elements there, so you should be careful with that. You should select the root for the animation, and very tiny scale, and then it pops out of the screen. And when that is happening, with that scale is happening, this outer plume, which is just a very simple smoke, and as you can see, well, most of these elements are parented to the main object, which you will expect things to work like that. If I move this, the smoke that follows it, that root is the parent of everything. And so as you can see here in the animation, when the ship rotates, the smoke, this tail, this plume, rotates with the engine. That's what I was expecting to happen. So I parented, and the rotation and all that location it's inherited to the children. But I had the problem with the outer smoke, where I didn't want it to rotate with the ship. So there is in Blender, let me check where is that. It's a constraint. You can limit the rotation of the objects or force it in a way. So since the rotation that the ship has is on the x-axis, I just say a limit and to 0, totally constraint of movement on the x-axis, and that's it. Quite simple. So you don't have to worry too much about it. It only changes the location. The rotation is preserved, And so when the smoke appears, uh, it's just going up but follows the the ship as expected. And well, as I already showed with the smoke, I tried to make it transparent, but it didn't work. So again, you copy the same name. In this case, it was RGBA. I don't know why it changed from COL color from the last export. I guess because the other was uh, FBX and this one is Alembic, so I guess it's because of that. And well, uh, trickeries that one, to make disappear the smoke here and there. And I did this here because I didn't want it to uh, do that in Quill. That will have taken me, I guess, a lot more of time to keyframe that. That will totally will drive me crazy, I guess. Um, so I am taking advantage of my previous knowledge with Blender and just create an animation the way I know, and that also is true with the ship, because I could have animated the whole ship with Quill keyframing, uh, but just here a few keyframes with interpolation between these points, and you have an animation, and I love that. And I know I can export this really easily. I could say to again Alembic format, and load it into Unity, and that I will all this animation is preserved. So that there's that. I think um, um, we could take advantage from the whole suite and not just trying to fixate with just one software, and that we could learn a lot from different software, and have a better pipeline. I know that even the VFX houses, they don't use strictly one kind of software. Um, so you just have to use what you need and use the tool for the job, meaning that you should know which tool is better for the job. So even when I do not use the big paid software like Cinema 4D or I don't know, Maya, um, I would surely be forced to use one of them if they have something that another type of software that I'm using is not required, or it's not up to the task that I need at the moment. So I will say that use the software for the tasks you need. Do not try to force yourself to use just one software for everything. Um, Even I use Blender for many things, but Oculus Medium, for example, it's quite a good sculpting tool, um, and I barely use the sculpting tools from Blender because I know, uh, at least for me, Medium is quite superior in that sense, and yeah, so there's that too. And for the rest, there's a light here. Let me check what it is. It's an area light. I have a bloom and volumetric effect, so that's why it looks this misty scene. If I remove this, it looks like this. So it's because of the sky. It's a bit orange. So when you add the volumetric, it gets darker, and it helps to set the tone of the environment. This terrain I've already used it before with some astronaut renders I did last year, So I'm recycling a bit of stuff, and simple flat shader. Let me check what this is. It's on the default. There it is. Very simple shader. Just it doesn't even have an emission. It didn't work for me. The emission shader for this. I wanted um, these shadows. So it's just a flat color with a bit of shadows provided by the light, and yeah, that's it. So, oh well, there is a bit of trickery with the sound. So let me remove this, and oh, this is not what I wanted. I wanted to close this. I can show this better. And there is the sound effects. There's this huge turbine because the audio effect. Because the audio effect in Blender, when it gets closer to the camera, you can hear how volume increases. So there is that thing, and I added a thought or thud. I don't know how that's pronounced. When it when ship goes down into the ground. Very light. So I wanted that mass sound. And there is an alter sound effect that at the beginning I was not planning to add that, but when I saw the animation, I just imagined this sound exactly when the engine stops and it starts to get cold and throw that amount of mist or smoke. So that sound was like my brain trying to play with the scene. That was fun. So I had to find a very nice I don't know, whoosh sound or whoosh sound that worked for me at that specific frame. So then again, it's the same. In this case, it's 24 frames per second. I could have chosen 60, but I just wanted, let's say, the film effect, 24 frames per second. And again, render audio. It makes all the sources into the same file, and for turbine, here is the speaker, and this one is for the whoosh sound, and it only plays once. And this is actually, this one turbine is huge file. I had to slide to match when it was on the ground, and started to reduce its revolutions. So yeah, I think this is pretty much for this week. I talk a lot, but I think this episode, compared to the one that I did last time, which I think I was quite stiff talking, this is better explained, and I hope that it helps somebody out there. So see you next week.